On Tech News today, France smacks down Amazon's aggressive discounts. Amazon smacks back. Plus, Satya Nadella sends an epic screed to employees about what the company is all about. Good news, they're not playing around with Xbox. Also, tablets have been blamed for the decline of PCs, but now tablet sales are dropping too. And Yelp accuses Google of favoring Google search results over Yelp's. Are they right? All that and more coming up right now.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by CashFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Tech News Today for Thursday, July 10th, 2014. Tech News Today is the show where we talk about the tech news with the journalists who report it. Welcome to Tech News Today. I'm Mike Elgan. Jason is off this week. Chad Johnson is filling in. Our co-anchor today is Don Reisinger, a technology columnist who writes for CNET, eWeek, the LA Times, Cat Fancy too, right, Don, I think? Cat Fancy?
Yeah, Cat Fancy. I'm really big with Cat Fancy.
Love
and
your work.
Also House Beautiful. And I love cats and I love couches. So.
We got a magazine in the mail yesterday that was from the previous owners of the house called Vegetables Magazine. So you know you're in Petaluma when you get a magazine about vegetables.
Well, and that had to be quite nice for you. Now you know everything about vegetables.
Yeah, I prefer the fruit rags myself, but what are you going to do? There's no accounting for taste. Let's jump right into the news. We've got plenty of it. The French government banned free ebooks in France starting today. So Amazon started charging for books formerly given away free. The price, €1 penny. Sam Schechner is a tech correspondent for Europe, Middle East, and Africa at the Wall Street Journal and joins us now from Paris. Welcome, Sam.
Thanks for having me.
So you told us before we started the show that you have a spectacular view of the Eiffel Tower nearby, but actually not in frame. So I'd like to invite all of our viewers and listeners to imagine off in the distance across the city of Paris, the spectacular Eiffel Tower.
Yeah, if it were there, nobody would look at me. So I figured.
We're not looking at you anyway. Don't worry about it, Sam. It's fine. It's fine. We're looking at that white wall behind you.
Well, let's take a look at Amazon and the government of France. Amazon might be obeying the letter of the law here, but definitely not the spirit of the law. What is France's response to this likely to be? They're selling ebooks for 1 penny instead of free.
Well, just a clarification. This isn't about ebooks. It's about physical books. And what the what the rule is that Amazon cannot either A, put a 5% discount, which is the sort of maximum discount in France, or B, do free shipping. And so Amazon is following the letter of the law in that they're no longer giving 5% discounts, which they gave to every book in their catalog in France before. And they're no longer doing free shipping, doing the little trick that you mentioned, just 1 cent for shipping. So just slightly more expensive than before. And I think that the government is probably not super happy about the 1 penny. Certainly a lot of people in the press today have chuckled about it here in France. But I think that in general, they're pretty happy with the impact of the rule. And the booksellers too, because it's essentially a 5% increase in all book prices in Amazon in France as of today.
When did this story break? Did this happen this morning when somebody discovered, or you discovered, that Amazon was actually charging the 1 penny?
Well, what happened is, this is actually, the story dates back until last year or a little bit before. The independent booksellers have been agitating for some sort of anti-Amazon law. It's actually against all online booksellers, but Amazon has a really big market share in France and globally.
And that's what it's called in France, right? It's called the anti-Amazon law, colloquially, not officially, but casually.
Colloquially, people do. Yeah, that's what it's called. And they were agitating for this because they felt it was unfair. Book prices in France, like in a lot of European countries, this may seem weird in the U.S., are regulated as a kind of effort to promote a diversity of authors and publishers. So in France, no bookseller can offer more than a 5% discount off the cover price of a book. And they're not the only European country. There's regulated book prices in Germany and Spain and various other European countries.
Lame.
What the booksellers were saying, these independents were saying, Amazon's so big, they're not only giving the 5% discount, they're also giving free shipping, and we can't make money if they do that. So we want some kind of rule that lets them not do both. And, you know, that was originally the rule. And then somebody said, well, what if Amazon just charges a penny? They'll be able to get around this, and they'll still do the 5% discount. So that's when they just sort of said no 5% discount for any books that are shipped to a customer. So that debate had been going on for quite some time. The law was one version of the law was first voted last fall, again earlier this year. And then what happened is yesterday it got published in the official journal of the French Republic, which is what makes a law basically get onto the books in France. And Amazon was the first out of the gate. It wasn't necessarily expected, but they applied it as of this morning. And so if you went to the website, it was updated with a message saying that they're sorry, but they can't give you the discount anymore. And we'll see if it hits their sales. Some people here speculate that it'll actually help Amazon because people are buying more for convenience than for the price necessarily. And if they still buy and are paying 5% more, then it could help their bottom line.
Yeah, life is good, right?
Life is good if you are like living, yeah, I mean, it's a great place to live, but there are definitely regulated elements to the economy here.
So how big is Amazon in France anyway, and Europe generally? I tended to think that Amazon was very dominant in the United States, but less so in Europe.
Then you'd be wrong. Amazon is a pretty big player.
Say that again. Say that again. Tell Mike he's wrong.
I mean, Amazon is not, you know, they don't break out a lot of statistics about how they operate in different countries. But they are, for instance, when it comes to online retailing, a very popular player in a lot of countries. There's some countries that already had a kind of online retailing presence before. France is one of them, so that there's some more competition. But in other places, Amazon is quite strong. They generate a lot of revenue through their European affiliate, which is a Luxembourg-based company for tax efficiency reasons. And then they're also very powerful in the cloud computing space, and they have a dominance similar to that they've got in the United States when it comes to all of their Amazon Web Services products. So there was a study, actually, a government report that came out last month about what they call the neutrality of platforms, which is this idea that there should be more regulation of big internet companies so that there's a level playing field, they argue, between companies in Europe and the big US companies. And in that report, there was some information that they had provided, can't necessarily vouch for it, about Amazon, where they say that it is set by 2017 to be have the largest market share among booksellers in France.
Oh, what do you know?
Hey, Sam, so one quick question. We're seeing a lot of regulation and a lot of regulatory concerns out of Europe, not as much in the U.S. Is that something you're going to be seeing more and more over the next several years? Do you think major companies like Amazon and the others are going to have major concerns with regulation?
Well, I think that, whether you call it regulation or, new laws or so, I mean, it depends on how you want to frame it in different countries. But yes, I think that there is a rising tide of discontent, especially in Europe, where the economy hasn't been doing so well, and there haven't been the same number of large, successful internet companies. There's a rising tide of discontent, feeling like they're behind and they need to somehow do something about it. But at the same time, there are deeper issues being raised by the increasing power of a handful of very large companies that they span the globe and they almost depass governments. And I think that these countries feel their power slipping away from them. And this kind of includes the US as well. And I think we're going to see more and more conflicts as governments and other kind of older institutions try to claw back whatever power or hang on to whatever power they feel they are losing to these large companies. And so you'll see it with antitrust battles against Google. You see it with all the tax crackdown that's going on, and discussion among major countries, including the U.S., on how to reform the tax system so that companies like Amazon and Google and others and also big oil companies pay more in corporate income tax. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right that we're going to see more of this and more conflict.
You can find Sam Schechner at WSJ.com. That's the Wall Street Journal's website, of course. And on Twitter at Sam Schech. Let me spell that, SAMSCHECH. Thank you so much, Sam, for coming on Tech News Today.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
Thanks, Sam.
Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella sent a 3,000-word manifesto to Microsoft employees today about his vision for the company. He proclaimed Microsoft as the, quote, productivity and platform company for the mobile-first and cloud-first world. You didn't hear the word PC in there anywhere. He also said that Microsoft will reinvent productivity. Juan Carlos Perez is a senior editor for the IDG News Service and joins us now. Welcome, Juan Carlos Perez.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Now, what was the purpose and overall theme of Nadella's epic memo?
Well, the way I took it, I thought it was kind of him letting the world know and letting the company know about some things that he has noticed since he became CEO in February. And the thing that I found most interesting was it's a long letter. It's more than 3,000 words, but the second part, which goes into what he understands that the company needs a change in culture, and a pretty dramatic one. If you read the wording that he uses, which is very eloquent but also very forceful. Now, the question there, as we all know, corporate culture revamping efforts generally don't go so well. They either work a little bit or don't work at all. So the question is, will he be successful in this dramatic corporate culture change that he wants to effect?
Yep. So Juan Carlos, you see this now a lot from Nadella. You're seeing this talk of mobile. You're seeing this talk of the cloud. You're not seeing this talk of the PC. Where do you think Microsoft is going in the next couple of years as it relates to all of its product lineup? Do you see things shrinking? Do you see Microsoft shrinking? And do you think that everything will be guided by mobile and the cloud, and everything beyond that will be secondary? It almost sounds that way, but we know now that, we still know that Office is a huge component of Microsoft's business. Windows is still a huge component of Microsoft's business. The servers are obviously a big concern. Server software, a big concern. How easy is it going to be to shift this giant, this major company, from being a PC-first firm that still relies very heavily on PCs to mobile and the cloud?
That is the big question. It is a big ship, as you say, and turning it in a different direction, which is basically what Satya Nadella keeps talking about, which is mobile first and cloud first. Now, Microsoft spent 30 years selling software in a particular way, and now obviously it's shifting its products to be delivered and sold via the cloud, and that goes for everything, from the Office desktop productivity apps all the way to the server products, so SharePoint and Exchange and Lync, Azure as a platform, the Cloud OS. So it is a big shift, and it's definitely not entirely clear that they will succeed, but it is something, I think, that there's a consensus out there that they need to do. So it's going to be interesting. Next week, they're having their big partner conference, and I'm sure that many partners are going to have questions for him. He's scheduled to be there because these are resellers and system integrators and consultants that have basically hitched their businesses to Microsoft. So they're making the shift along with the company. So that's going to be an interesting thing to keep an eye on next week.
I found this manifesto to be another impressive attribute of Satya Nadella, who so far hasn't failed to impress across the board, in my opinion. It was really great because he's only the third CEO in the entire history of Microsoft, the first being Bill Gates, of course, the second Steve Ballmer. And under Bill Gates, the overall theme, or whatever you would want to call it, if Bill Gates did write a manifesto, it was all about two things. We're going to sell, sell, sell. And the other thing was we're going to dominate everything. And this is less about what we're going to do, how about our power and our success, and more about how we're going to change the world. We're going to make people really productive. We're going to thrill people with all these experiences. He talked about experiences related to Delve and Cortana. But one of the really interesting things that I think this is going to be greeted with a lot of excitement is that he specifically gave a shout out to Xbox and said, Xbox is very important to us. It's not going anywhere. He squelched the rumors that they were going to move beyond it or whatever. People were afraid that because he's such an enterprise guy that he wouldn't care about Xbox. And he said, no, we really deeply care about Xbox. It's very important to us. So that was an important shift as well. Do you have any final thoughts about this, this manifesto and how it's going to impact perceptions of Microsoft and how it's going to impact the intended recipients, ostensibly, which is the employees of Microsoft?
Yeah, well, one bit that also was interesting is that he retired the description of the company as a devices and services company, and introduced the idea that the company wants to be a provider of productivity solutions and a platform provider. However, what I do think is going to be most interesting to keep an eye on is whether he does indeed manage to shift this company's culture. I mean, Ballmer tried it at the end of his tenure with the One Microsoft program. It's not clear from the letter whether Nadella is going to build on that or whether he's putting that aside and implementing his new plan, his own plan. But if you read this letter, the portions about the need to change the culture, it's clear that this is a big priority for him, and that he thinks without it, nothing else is going to happen. None of the other goals he has is going to happen. So he's talking about being faster, about ending bureaucracy, I suppose. He doesn't use that word, but it's kind of implied. So I will be very interested to see if 6 months, a year from now, he has really made progress on that, because others have tried, and Microsoft has a bad reputation from a corporate level as a place to work.
Yeah. And the other point to be made, you mentioned that he emphasized platforms, but he didn't specify Windows platforms or Microsoft platforms. He said platforms. And so with Microsoft's recent acceptance of Android, recent embrace of iOS, it seems to me that he means platforms generally, and that Microsoft wants to be on all the major platforms. At least, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it seemed to be a de-emphasis on Windows as the platform and a re-emphasis on the importance of platforms generally. Juan Carlos,
Mike, I think
we're going to have to move on from this story, Don, because we're already at 10:30. But I just wanted to thank Juan Carlos Perez for coming on. Juan Carlos Perez writes for the IDG news service, and you can find his work on PCWorld.com, ComputerWorld.com, and many, many other publications where IDG exists, and also on Twitter at Juan C. Perez. Thank you so much, Juan Carlos, for coming on Tech News Today.
Okay, thank you for having me.
All right. So, Don, the PC market was in decline for some time, and that was blamed on tablets. Now the tablet market seems to be in decline. What's going on?
Yeah, what's going on is right. Tablets are down for the first time. Tablet shipments are down for the first time. Now, we need to make it clear. We talk shipments, we talk sales. There are two very different things. But according to the latest research from NPD, tablet shipments are down year over year to 56 million units compared to 59 million units last year. And we're finding here, according to NPD, that consumers are changing their buying habits because of two core factors. Number one, they're not as interested in the smaller form factor, 7 to 8 inch devices as they once were. And number two, phablets, those large 5.5 inch smartphones, are starting to cannibalize some of the lower end tablet sales. So it's an interesting shift here. And what we're seeing essentially is that people, while they're willing to invest in tablets still, and tablets are still important and popular, they're not as popular as they once were because things are changing. And I have to wonder, and I want to ask you, Mike, is this the beginning of a slide for tablets?
I think it is. Part of the problem is that tablets are very durable, and the difference between a new tablet versus the old tablet isn't really that perceptible compared to like a PC. If you have a PC for 2 or 3 years and you upgrade to a new PC, the performance of that computer, especially on a price ratio, is going to be drastic. You're really going to notice it. On a tablet, not so much, unless you're upgrading from a lower resolution screen to like a Retina or Retina quality screen with a tablet. You're not going to notice that much of a performance boost or any sort of benefit. You may want to upgrade the size, downgrade the size. People were embracing the smaller tablets for a while, and that sort of kind of petered out. But, really, a tablet that you bought 2 years ago or 3 years ago is really still great. Most of the better tablets are very durable. They don't get messed up. They're just great. So I think that's a sort of a problem that's inherent in the platform as well. And you mentioned phablets. I think that's the real thing that's happening here, is that people are kind of sort of downsizing their tablets. First, everybody liked the iPad-sized tablet, then they like the smaller 7-inch tablets, and now huge phones are extremely popular. And with wearable technology, I think it's getting to the point where, as we heard in the Microsoft story, it's all about mobile and the cloud. So, I don't think it's the end of the world for either PCs or tablets. But I think that the idea that they're going to continue this rapid growth into the future is not really going to happen. All the new markets, the majority of the new customers are going to be in the emerging world, and they're not going to be buying iPads. They're going to be embracing phablets. Even small business owners are going to be running their business with essentially large phones, and I think that's the future. And so I think this sort of doldrums for both the PC and tablet markets are pretty much here to stay.
Well, and 2 quick points there. First off, the PC market did relatively well compared to recent quarters. It was essentially flat with about 78.5 million PC shipments. So some of the bloodletting has gone down, at least in the PC market. So that's good news for the PC makers. But I think this latest tablet shipment announcement is really bad news for Apple. Apple is a company that wants you to buy your new products every year, and it comes up with new features that it didn't have last year. And that, if you look at Apple's financials, has been the key to its success. It's getting people to buy. First, it was new iPods every year. Then it was new iPhones every year or two. And now it's new tablets every year or two. But what you say is right. These tablet buyers are saying, look, that thing works. It's working really well. And I don't need to buy another one for a few years. And then when I do buy a new one, I don't need to buy my son or daughter a new one. I can just give them my old one and it'll work fine for them. So it's an interesting shift in the way people are using these things. And we also have to remember the BYOD. We go enterprise real quick and we say, look, a lot of consumers are bringing in their own tablets into the enterprise, helping companies not have to invest so much in tablets. So there are a lot of underlying factors here that I think are very, very troublesome for Apple. And I think, going back to your point, in emerging markets, selling people on iPads that are going to cost several $100s compared to other devices that are going to be much, much less is going to be extremely difficult. And so when you look at all this data together, I think Apple needs to really start to figure out how it's going to stay in the lead here in tablets. And I'm not sure what it's going to be. I think it's going to have to be the wearables. I think it's going to have to be an expansion of the product line. And that's something that, of course, we know that when Steve Jobs had left Apple, became their strategy. And when he came back, he reduced the product line. So can Apple be a company that can, what's a question we've been asking for years now, A, survive and thrive without Steve Jobs? And B, is it a company that can do well with multiple products offered? And what we've seen over the last several years is Apple has offered fewer and fewer products because it feels as though it can make more money on that core product and just sell more of those. But now it appears that the market's changing. Companies need to offer more products, and it's incumbent upon Apple to adapt to that. And whether it will effectively remains to be seen.
I think you've got it exactly right, zeroing in on Apple, because Apple is so dependent on primarily phones, but secondarily tablets for its revenue and its profits. But it has to be said that this is all in comparison with Apple's past experience with tablets. You know, if you recall, Apple shipped the iPad in 2010, and they just dominated the market for 2 years. There was like 2 years where Apple had the only good tablet. Their first 1.0 release of the iPad was fantastic. It was probably the most elegant and high quality release of any 1.0 product that I'm aware of. And then it took a while for the Android world to catch up, and now it has caught up, and it's really hurting Apple because Apple has a pricier product. And again, it's more difficult to differentiate the quality differences between a high-end Samsung tablet and an iPad, because essentially there aren't any moving parts. It's a screen with icons and apps. And so it's going to be very difficult for Apple. My prediction, though, is that Apple will, instead of trying to make a killing and continue to make a killing and dominate the tablet market, they're going to try to resurge their dominance in the phone market and also embrace mobile e-commerce. And I think they're going to make, over the next few years, Apple's going to get an increasing amount of their revenue from everybody buying things with their iPhones. And so that's just my own prediction. But it's an interesting story. We'll keep an eye on it. It's nice to see PCs doing a little better because they've had some really bad quarters recently. So we'll see how that goes. Well, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against Aereo last month, and some said the company was done for. But yesterday, the CEO sent a letter to a U.S. District Court in New York saying that because the Supreme Court smacked down Aereo by calling it a cable company, the company is entitled, therefore, to be licensed as a cable company. Joining us from Variety magazine is Ted Johnson, who writes for that publication. Welcome, Ted.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Glad you're on again. Now, is Aereo right? Does the Supreme Court's decision really mean that Aereo is actually and legally a cable company?
Well, broadcasters are going to say that this was a very narrow ruling, and that while the Supreme Court said it was similar to a cable company, and it didn't actually say that it was a cable company. So they're really going to look to that and say, listen, this does not mean that you actually qualify for this type of statutory license. Essentially, what Aereo is trying to do is to exploit what was a loss, a pretty big loss at the Supreme Court, and turn it to their advantage. They are really doing a shift in legal strategy. They argued all along, even at the Supreme Court, that they were not a cable company, and there was a reasoning behind that. That is because there had been lower court rulings that had looked at other companies like Aereo that had tried to argue, hey, we're like a cable company. All we need to do is pay for a statutory license, and then we get this broadcast content. And they had lost, and had resoundingly lost. So Aereo, I think, was probably a little bit surprised at the Supreme Court's reasoning for its decision, and now they're really trying to turn it to their advantage. But it's an interesting question. The day of the decision, I asked some attorneys, listen, the Supreme Court is saying that Aereo is like a cable company. Doesn't this open up a whole new avenue? And these attorneys said, no, this ruling really only applies to this particular instance. So here you have Aereo trying to survive with this kind of new legal strategy.
So, Ted, you talk about Aereo going through the legal process saying we're not a cable company. Now they're trying to shift gears despite all of those previous lawsuits that would suggest that might not be the best tactic. I mean, is this just a Hail Mary on their part, or is there something more to this? Is there something that they feel they can bring to the table that those other firms haven't, and therefore they can be successful?
Well, I still feel it may be a little bit of a Hail Mary because within the letter that Aereo sent to the court, they also said if the court should decide that we are not a cable company and that we are not entitled to that statutory license, then we would like them to try to limit the ruling to just live or nearly live programming. So maybe we could exist in some other type of format, providing pre-recorded content, for instance. So the fact that Aereo raised the prospect that they may actually lose this latest legal strategy shows me that hey, we're just trying all options here and seeing which one actually does stick.
I would totally agree with that. This looks pretty desperate, and it seems very unlikely to succeed. Ted Johnson writes for Variety.com, and you can find him on Twitter at TedStew. That's TEDSTEW. Thank you so much for coming on Tech News Today again, Ted Johnson.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks,
right.
Ted.
Well, Don, apparently Microsoft is also being forced to allow people to be forgotten in Europe. What are they doing there?
I'm forgotten all the time, but I don't get to ask.
Well, you have that right.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. So as you know, the EU came out and said, look, people in the European Union have the right to be forgotten. What that means is that Google would have to create a form in which people would say, I want this information about me on the internet to be wiped clean from all of your search results. And Google has been forced to comply. Now, Google has so far received about 70,000 requests through its online form. Microsoft, operating Bing, although it's much smaller than Google and wasn't really included in any of those lawsuits, is now following suit and is saying that it's going to be creating an online form all of its own to allow people to remove results from its own search results. So we have Google doing it and already doing it, and now Microsoft probably as a preemptive strike against anything that the EU might want to bring against Microsoft is saying, okay, you know what, we'll follow suit and we'll do the same thing. So interesting news here. Right to be forgotten, I think, is something that, well, Google doesn't really like, Microsoft probably doesn't like, but Microsoft has no choice. I mean, Google has said, we don't own the content. All we are all we're doing is going across the web, trying to find the content and making it available to people in the event they want that. We don't own it, we don't publish it, and therefore we shouldn't be responsible for it. But the EU's Court of Justice says, no, 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 you are responsible, and we want this taken off, all of your search results.
So the context for this and the aspect of it, I think, has been somewhat misreported in the press, is that what this does is it doesn't require companies like Microsoft or Google to erase links to certain types of content when people submitted a request to be forgotten. What it does is it affects what the search query is. The name of the person can no longer be used as a search query to provide the results over specific results. For example, let's say Joe Schmo had something that happened in his past, and that thing had changed, and now it's besmirching his reputation because it doesn't exist anymore. So if he filed a right to be forgotten with Microsoft or Google, and Google complied with that, then searching for Joe Schmo would not return the results that would give those old results. However, searching for other things would return those articles. So that's the part of it that I think has been misreported. The other thing that's important for people to know is that within the United States, Google is absolutely dominant as a search engine, and Bing is a very minor player. In Europe, that's a little bit less of the case. Bing does better in Europe compared with Google. It doesn't do better than Google. It simply has a larger market share in European countries. It varies in different countries, but it's a bigger player there. Google has received about 70,000 complaints. At least that's the most recent report. Microsoft has presumably received a subset of those. And it's also interesting that the time difference in compliance. Google complied right away. It took Microsoft a month later than Google to comply. And that's probably, and this is my own analysis, my own perception, Google wanted to get out there and immediately start complying so that people could complain about it, people could see what's wrong with it, and they had this kind of passive-aggressive approach to it where they were, doing all kinds of things like putting a notice at the bottom of all European search results saying that these may be compromised results, even if the actual search result didn't have anything compromised about it. So it's an interesting dynamic between Google and Microsoft there. Like you said, Don, both of them are not going to like this. And this, there's yet another interesting dimension of this, and then we'll move on. But that is that within the United States, the European Union's right to be forgotten is something of an outrage. It's a horrible example of unwanted censorship. But within Europe, it's actually kind of popular. It's not considered generally to be a horrible thing like it is here in the United States. So we'll be following the story, and we'll see where it goes. But in the meantime, it looks like Microsoft is finally getting around to complying. And by the way, their form, which they chose, the court didn't even mandate what the process would be for people to request the right to be forgotten. Microsoft pretty much went with a Google Playbook with an online form that people can fill out. So I guess that's a logical way to go. Well, documents leaked to TechCrunch from inside Yelp accuse Google of favoring Google Plus content over Yelp content in search results. It's a controversial story, but Danny Sullivan, who is the editor-in-chief of Search Engine Land, had a different take on it and disagreed with the reporting on it and also with Yelp's actual information that was leaked. Welcome, Danny Sullivan.
Thank you.
So glad you're here. Now, before we get into your analysis, can you describe briefly what these documents accused Google of doing exactly?
There were two things. One was an example of how when you search in the United States, you get what's called the local carousel. You do a search for, say, Hotel San Francisco, and you'll see this sort of black box at the top, and you can click on different hotels. And when you click on it, it generates new search results, and the hotel that you clicked on has a little panel that appears on the right side of the page. And if you do that kind of a search in Europe, that doesn't happen, and it seems like they're trying to perhaps use this to lobby that Google is going to bring this out in Europe, and that's going to further prevent Yelp or other players from getting information. But those were really just two different screenshots. We don't know that much about it. The other thing that was much more interesting, at least to me, was that there was this study that was done to show that Google is somehow taking 20% of the traffic that really should belong to Yelp. At least that's how the study was summarized. And when I went through it, I realized actually it wasn't doing that at all. Google was taking hardly any of the traffic that supposedly was deserved to belong to Yelp.
Now, from your piece, I learned that the two problems with that is that the Yelp study, again, that this is all based on, counted traffic linked to the original stores. For example, a restaurant. If you search just for a restaurant, the number one result is a link to the restaurant's website, which makes a lot of sense. But the study that came from Yelp said that that was a link to Google Plus, which, as you pointed out, is incorrect. There's also the dimension of actual behavior of users and where they click, and the vast majority of them were clicking on links other than the Google Plus link. Am I summarizing that correctly?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's unclear whether or not this was people within Yelp that did the study or an outside company that they hired, but there seemed to be this attempt to figure out whether or not Google was somehow getting traffic that should have gone to Yelp by doing Google Plus stuff. So they gathered up a panel of people that clearly understood Yelp as a reviews website. They did some filtering so they could come up with a group of people that understood if you were looking for local reviews, you could go to Yelp. And then they asked them, if you were to click on one thing to help you find, I can't remember the name of the restaurant, but the name of this restaurant plus Yelp, all those words together, what would you click on? And then they showed them an example of the search results page. And the search results page for this particular search had a link to the restaurant at the top. And then below the description of the restaurant, there are a couple smaller links that led to, Google Plus content or Google Maps. And then below that was, the Yelp review. It was in number 2. And, 80% of the people clicked on the Yelp review. So most people who were trying to figure out what would I click on if I did a search for, a restaurant plus the word Yelp, I think correctly we would assume clicked on the restaurant link. And then the study said that the other 20% all clicked on what they called the Google Plus area. But the Google Plus area included the link to the restaurant. And in fact, if you actually looked at all the clicks that were registered on this sort of heat map that was done, nobody clicked on but one of the Google Plus links that were at the bottom of the description. They were all clicking on the restaurant. But they still decided to count all those links as if they were traffic that Google had somehow intercepted and redirected into Google Plus when that wasn't the case.
So Danny, I mean, basically what you're saying, and I agree, is that this is probably just nonsense. But where do you come in on this as it relates to? I mean, we've heard a lot of complaints about Google in the past, and there have been real complaints about Google in the past, especially in the EU, about showing results, its own results above others, giving itself special treatment. When we talk about travel plans, it can't necessarily put its own stuff. We have all of these concerns about Google, but is it really incumbent upon Google to be the self-policing organization of the internet? I sort of, here's where I'm coming from, and you can respond quickly, but I'll be quick. essentially, what's wrong with Google promoting itself? It's a business. It's trying to run a business. And I understand there are competitors. I understand there's a possibility that it can hurt competition and that it can use its place as the dominant force in search to essentially put others down. But this is also business. And so Google putting a Google Maps link underneath a website link and putting a Google Plus page link underneath a website link, to me, is nothing beyond the ordinary, and something that Yelp or any other organization shouldn't really take issue with. I think this is a load of nonsense. I think Google has the right to do these kinds of things. And to say otherwise, to me, seems like it's a little, I don't know, anti-competitive towards Google, that Google suddenly has this higher standard that it must live by, no matter what, compared to other firms. What do you think?
Well, if you have a monopoly, which Google does even in the US, by definition, they've even self-admitted that they have a monopoly share of searches, you are sometimes held to higher standards. So that's sort of a sucky fact of life of your success, I suppose. But for the most part, I find most of these complaints kind of absurd. There are lots of charged words that are tossed around. Google's promoting its own content and blah, 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 blah. It's like saying I turned on CBS and I can't believe it. CBS was showing me a lot of shows on CBS that CBS produced. Google isn't promoting its vertical search engines over other vertical search engines. Google is a search engine. And a search engine, if you turn to it and you're trying to find directions, will show you a map. Or a search engine that if you do a search for products, will show you product listings. We've had vertical search engines from before we had Google and integrated in regular search engines. So, I've usually characterized these complaints as like somebody saying that, the Wall Street Journal being upset that their sports section doesn't appear in the New York Times, and how unfair is that? It's not unfair. That's the search engine serving the user by giving them vertical search results. And I actually think that sadly what it means is that a lot of attention has been wasted on Google's competitors somehow feeling like Google's not doing a good enough job promoting their search engines in the face of the attention that should be focused on whether Google has an anti-competitive advantage because it gathers data from products that it gives away, or possibly could be citing that it wants to favor, advertisers, or, and gathers data in a way that other people can't possibly necessarily gather, or they have an unfair advantage because they can use their search revenues to give away free analytics and then maybe take that data in to try to improve their analytics stuff, or give away free Wi-Fi and then use that to balance certain things off. There are things that Google has conflicts that are far more interesting to research and decide whether or not you should be dealing with than, a competing search engine.
Well, it looks like we just had a problem with Danny Sullivan's connection there on Skype.
What's that, Mike? You just hung up on Danny Sullivan? What's the matter with you?
No,
why'd you hang up on him?
That is incorrect. You are incorrect.
Mike hung up on. Look, Mike hung up on him, folks.
So
I saw it myself.
Let's throw Skype under the bus on this one. My own view is that one of the interesting things about this whole issue with Google, and whether it's one is the question that you brought up, which is whether it's okay for Google to favor its own services on its search engine. That's one question. I tend to think that it isn't okay. It might be legal, it might be illegal, I don't know, but I don't think it's okay. I think that Google should do what it says that it does, and that is treat them all fairly. The other issue is that it's almost impossible, it is impossible, to really understand whether or not they actually do that for a number of reasons. One of them is that, if you look at the difference between results going to Facebook or Google+, for example, results on Facebook require the cooperation of Facebook, whereas the results on Google+, Google has full access to that, and so you can't really tell whether if in fact Google Plus is favored over Facebook, whether that's the result of what Facebook is sharing or the result of Google's own policy or their own algorithms or whatever. There's also the issue of, let's say something like Google Gmail or something like that, and whether a link goes to an alternative to Gmail or goes to Gmail. If the most popular service is a Google service, then that most popular service should be expected to be at the top of search results. the competitor could argue that it's at the top of search results because it's it's the most popular because it is. So which is it? Is it on the top because it's most popular, or is it most popular because it's on top? How do you resolve that chicken and egg conundrum? In any event, Chad, do we have Danny back? Or yeah, okay. So Danny, welcome back. Sorry, we're having Skype issues today, but I just
sorry, Danny, Mike hung up on you. Sorry about that.
So I just wanted to, I hung up on you for the record. No,
we'll not hear any more of this.
Yes. So in any event, do you have any final thoughts on this whole thing? I mean, one component of this, of course, is that Google is currently facing a tentative agreement with the European Union over this very issue. Is this a bunch of FUD by Yelp, or could this be just a stunt by Yelp to kind of make Google look bad?
It's important to remember that Yelp officially didn't put this out. So they have a study. Whether they were going to try to use that study, maybe. Although the study also concluded that none of this was hurting their traffic. So but it's fair to say we're going through the last gasps of various competitors in the EU to try to get a stronger agreement than what's been proposed for Google. So yes, I think you can expect more of this. I think you can expect to hear the rhetoric ramp up. But I think that in the end, the EU isn't really going to do that much more to Google because, Google actually does treat a lot of these competitors far more fairly than perhaps the competitors themselves might have treated Google. Yeah. They send before I got cut off when Yelp was complaining to the FTC about Google, they were complaining that Google was only sending them 75% of all their traffic. Like Yelp's traffic, 75% of it came from Google. That's not how you treat a competitor if you're trying to hurt them. If you're trying to hurt a competitor, you don't send them any traffic. So Google sends lots of competitors lots of traffic. They feel like they want to get more, or there's some concern that maybe Google will lock things out. But I think the EU is going to be relatively minor in what it does for Google because for the most part, there's not a lot to find wrong with what Google's doing. People are just deliberately choosing it because it's a very good product.
Danny Sullivan can be found at searchengineland.com and on Twitter at Danny Sullivan. Danny is a frequent guest on Twit Network shows. Thank you so much, Danny, for joining us on Tech News Today this morning.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, Don, Chinese hackers are at it again, but this one is kind of scary, potentially. What's going on?
So, yeah, by the way, it's afternoon. I don't know why I just said nice morning. I mean, what are you talking about?
Not here in the chicken capital of the world. Still in the morning.
In the vegetable capital of the world.
Right.
So, so China back in March, according to the Department of Homeland Security in a report in the Wall Street Journal, or the New York Times, I'm sorry, the New York Times, the original article. Chinese hackers had worked their way into essentially potentially finding personal and financial information out about top people that have top secret security clearance. So what does this mean? This means bad stuff, potentially. Now, the Department of Homeland Security has said, so far we have not found any significant breach. We do not believe at this point that personal information has been stolen. We're not sure, though. We're still trying to determine that. We also don't know if the Chinese hackers came from the Chinese government or if they're from a separate group. But this is just the latest in a long line of back and forth hacking between the U.S. and China. And this one is potentially very concerning because the Chinese hackers were gunning for personally identifiable information and financial information, familial information about people that have the highest level of security clearance in the United States. So this was a serious one. And it looks like the U.S. was able to stop it before it got too far, but exactly what they got, we don't know yet.
And even Secretary of State John Kerry specified that they didn't actually get what they were looking for, but clearly they were attempting to do that. And again, it's not clear whether they were just going after the data or whether they wanted to use that to sort of blackmail or socially engineer people with security clearance or who had applied for security clearance. But it's an interesting story and yet another in the long list of ways in which the U.S. and China are hacking each other. But this one seems particularly potentially disturbing. Well, we reported this week on Android's factory reset option, which a security company found to be less than effective at erasing user data. A TNT fan, Steve Honecker, wrote us an email about this, and he said the following. Yesterday, you talked about the factory reset not clearing all personal data. As a Security Now listener, I assumed that this wasn't actually securing wiping the hard drive. My solution was to use the full drive encryption built into the into Android prior to doing the factory reset to prevent the data from being recoverable. See, Security Now listeners and viewers always have these better solutions. Hope that this helps anyone considering selling an old device. Love the show. Well, thank you so much for that email. And you are absolutely right about that. And we can't trust the factory reset option on any mobile platform as far as I know. Well, in a follow-up, we told you Monday about a 36-year-old spacecraft that was fired up again after being abandoned in space by NASA in 1997. The resurrection of the International Sun-Earth Explorer 3 probe was initiated by a private team after a crowdfunding effort to raise money for the project. Sadly, however, the project now looks doomed, sort of. The team intended to use existing fuel to move the ISEE-3 into a stable position where it could be accessed constantly from Earth. They're essentially going to put it between the Earth and the Sun as the Earth rotated around the Sun, so it would always be right there and they could always communicate with it. It's presently in a orbit around the Sun itself, so for a lot of the time it's out of reach from communication. But after an initial burn, the team has concluded that the spacecraft appears to be out of fuel and they can't move it, and that is somewhat tragic. Well, in other news, we showed you this week YouTube reviewer Marques Brownlee's video where he used a knife and keys on an iPhone 6 Sapphire screen and couldn't scratch it or break it. Well, today, a Chinese reviewer tried an even wider variety of ways to damage the iPhone 6 screen and found only one. And we're going to show that to you if you're watching the video right now. Apparently, driving over the screen with a car is the only known way to damage it. Now,
oh, crap.
Yeah.
I do that all the time.
That's right. So here is a part of the video where he's showing Brownlee's tests. This video, before this part in the video, has he's trying everything. He's like got a lighter to it. He's really trying to damage it. But you'll see near the end that he drives over, and when the car simply runs over it and it smashes into smithereens. So that's how you do it, folks. If you want to smash an iPhone 6 Sapphire screen, you're going to need a car to do that. Pedestrians will be unable to do this.
What about a bike?
They didn't test it with a bike, but that seems unlikely. Go-kart, I don't think so. No, you need a heavy car. Well, that's the tech news today. Don Reisinger, thanks so much for joining us. You're normally our Friday co-anchor. You switched with Elise Hugh.
It was Friday.
Yeah, well, it's go ahead and take the rest of the weekend off. It can be your Friday. But I want to thank you so much, and we'll see you next Friday here on the show when you co-anchor then.
All right, thanks a lot.
All right, thanks, Don. Well, you can subscribe to Tech News Today on iTunes, YouTube, Feedly, Yahoo, RSS, and many other options. You can choose your favorite way to subscribe at twit.tv/TNT, and please send us your thoughts and opinions. Send email to tnt@twit.tv or leave voicemail at 260-TNT-SHOW. Also, don't miss our evening newscast, Tech News Tonight, at 4 p.m. Pacific tonight and every weeknight right here on the Twit Network. My name is Mike Elgan. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.